Welcome everyone to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group and I'm the Advertising and Marketing Manager for HGA, and I'll be your host today. Today, Textiles and Tea is sponsored by Meridian Mill House. They provide these beautiful undyed wool and yarns for any kind of fiber art. Go check them out at meridianmillhouse.com. We are going to have questions today. They'll be the last 15 minutes of the session. So if you would, please put your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. I also need to let you know that we are in the middle of thunderstorms here in Atlanta area. And if we lose power, bear with us. We'll come back up as soon as we can. We've had a little trouble yesterday and today with electricity going out. So cross your fingers. Let's see if we can get through this. Today we have Sue Weil with us to have tea. Sue has a Bachelor of Arts in Social Anthropology from Harvard University. But while she was there, she also took studio art classes. Early in her career, she wove one-of-a-kind fabric for her own line of women's clothing. But after leaving the field for a little while, she came back in 2011, and she returned to weaving with a focus on tapestry. She combined her interest in anthropology and art, and she found herself drawn to the connection between the ancient and the modern cultures, and creating cloth, rugs, and tapestry that they address the needs for warmth and beauty through her fiber. Her works have appeared in numerous juried exhibits throughout the US and Canada, and as well as solo shows in the San Francisco Bay Area. Welcome, Sue. I'm glad to have you here today.
Hi there, thank you. Glad you invited me.
All right, well, let's see if we can get through this thunderstorm today, okay? Our first question is always so important. What's your favorite tea?
All right, tea in here is an herbal peach tea. Actually, I didn't even think about it, but hey, for the Georgia state, huh?
That's right.
All right.
Wonderful. Well, I have to ask, how did you find the fiber arts, or did fiber arts find you?
Chicken and egg, huh? I would say when I was about 3 years old, my mom put knitting needles in my hands and taught me to knit. She was right-handed, I was left-handed. It's one of the few things I do as a righty. And then somewhere along the line, not long after that, I learned to crochet, was introduced to the concept of weaving. A lot of people have used those little pot holder, like little peg looms. So that was my first intro to weaving. And then after that, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of a popsicle stick loom, but I used a popsicle stick loom, which is the basics of backstrap weaving, a rigid heddle. And when I was a sophomore in college, I was looking for a distraction away from academics and found a course in floor loom weaving at the Cambridge Center for Adult Education. So that's where I took my first floor loom weaving class, and I was totally hooked. So from there, I bought a loom. The university gave me a basement room to use as a studio, and that was kind of sort of it.
Oh, that's wonderful that you got the studio space. That's great.
Well, yeah, it was great, except it was a basement room, which did flood one time, so that my oldest loom still has the traces of flood damage to its legs, but it's been through the wars. It's a beast. It works.
Well, I know that several of the people that we've interviewed have a background in anthropology also. So how do you think anthropology and your weaving kind of combine or work together?
Excellent question. While I was at school, it took me a while to find anthropology. I had come in thinking that I'd study history and literature. I thought maybe I'd study English. And it wasn't until junior year that I discovered anthropology. Now, I don't know what the audience is like here, but I'm old enough to the point where anthropology wasn't even a concept that was introduced K through 12. So it wasn't until I got to university that I even learned about it as a discipline and was completely taken in just sort of looking at culture, anybody in the world, sort of the universal nature of food, clothing, shelter as being our basic human needs, and how each area, each culture finds its way of answering those needs. So I was studying that, but also very, very, very involved in arts at the same time. And someone told me about a professor at school named Moni Adams, who bridged the fine arts and the anthropology department, and her specialty was Indonesian textiles. So she was willing to sponsor an independent study with me where I did the legwork of actually creating things. I'd bring in some of my samples, and she would hand off different kinds of texts, et cetera, for me to learn a little bit more about. So they got kind of sort of married then and took off.
Oh, that's great. I had just imagined that you had taken some classes or, here and there, but it sounds like it was really part of your academics at that time as well.
It was. I think, as I said, part of it for me was a departure from strict academics, and yet this did marry them nicely. And I think I was always hooked on fiber. It was just, if we had in those days the terminology to be hardwired into something, it was sort of part of my makeup. So it worked beautifully. And then she introduced me to things like African strip weaving, the kente cloth. Mm-hmm. And the idea for me that you could weave a narrow strip and then connect those strips into a full-on piece of cloth. There were so many different ways of approaching the different cultural side of weaving along with the practical side. So that, and then also she'd introduced me to a lot of different masks from different, like the Iroquois had the corn husk masks, and the Inuit, sort of these wonderful Alaskan masks were, and one of the things I loved about those is that they're asymmetrical, or they can be asymmetrical. So you might see a round eye and a crescent moon eye and maybe a feather for the breath. There were all these things that when we think of faces, we think of symmetry, but I loved that concept of asymmetry in a face.
Well, I've got a statement here that is on, I think it's on your Facebook or your website, and I love this. It says, as an artist, my goal is to weave tapestries that lend beauty and a sense of quiet to the places they inhabit. And I can see that in your work, but I'm also aware that a lot of your work has energy to it. And we have two examples here. One is the rising seas and wildfires on our planet in crisis. That's one on the left. And the other one is a nod to Gee's Bend. Now, these pieces have clear movement and strong lines. Can you speak to this?
Well, first of all, thank you. Yes, the one on the right, the a nod to Gee's Bend, actually was inspired by the kente cloth, that concept of doing, because I had actually woven the 3 narrow strips and then did the repeat of sort of that denim area and then the high energy black and white stripes, and then put them so that they were at odds with one another. And it was just, it's an exploration of sort of a concept. And then the other one on the left, the one that rising seas and wildfire, that one combined a few different techniques. If you look at it closely, you'll see that there is some pulled warp in there. And the idea here was of, especially in Northern California, but in plenty of places around our country and the globe, we have the global warming, and we have here sort of these sand colored hills as everything dries out in the summertime. So in terms of energy, there are times when I'm weaving and I have that need just to shut down and make things quiet and calm around me, but it doesn't necessarily mean that my pieces are always going to be quiet and calm. So especially when I'm getting into pieces where there's a gallery on my website called Finding Voice. And there is that sense of, I may not be the first person in line to be marching, but through my pieces, through my tapestries, I am trying to get out there and say some of the things that are important to me.
Well, I have a scenario for you.
Okay.
I'm walking into the gallery at Convergence in 2022. We're going to be in Knoxville, right? And I see the exhibit Symphony of the Mountains. And here is your work, a peek into Monet's garden. And you're a little voice sitting on my shoulder talking to me. And what would you tell me about this work so it really would enhance my experience and my viewing of this work? What would you say to me?
First of all, in terms of structure, I was playing around with pulled warp and liked the idea of doing a piece that was flat. And I'm calling this style of work, because I have a few different pieces on this theme, dichotomies. And what I've done is I've juxtaposed the sort of the wood grain, that black and white area with the color area. What I would tell you about that, it probably, in terms of its origins, combines a few things. When I was growing up, we had a white picket fence around our house. And whenever I was coming home, if like a cabbie or someone was driving me, I'd say, oh yeah, turn into, to the house with a white picket fence. So when I started creating this piece and then doing the color, it was this sense to me of looking between the pickets through to this private, wonderful little world. And then if you go online, or if you've had the fortune of seeing Giverny and seeing the gardens, Monet's gardens, and if you sort of squint your eyes and make it all blurry, you see just this rich color all around. So for me, I guess this piece was looking maybe from the outside into a place that I may or may not have ever been invited into, but getting this sense of the rich color. So I don't know, if I were that voice on your shoulder, would that help?
That's great. I like that. I came up with that question because I actually went to a gallery one time, and it was a tapestry show. I don't know a lot about tapestry, sorry. And a tapestry artist was with me, and just her talking made me see things differently, not necessarily better or worse, but differently, because I had that input about the work. And so that's exactly what you said, what you gave us there.
Yeah. Well, and I would say recently I had a Facebook conversation with somebody. I had put some pieces up. It was one of those wonderful, 10-day challenges. Someone, nominates you, and for 10 days you put your work up there. And there was a piece of mine, which I think you're going to show later, so I won't talk about it in specifics, but she mentioned a couple of things that she saw in the piece, and she almost put it out there as a question to me. Did you mean this or did you mean that? And I kindly, deferred and just said, I don't want to tell you what to see. When I do my work, my preference is to do abstract. Sometimes it's slightly more representational than other times, but my feeling about my work anyway, and about abstract art, is that it really does invite the viewer to have their own impulse, their own reaction, their own response to it. So that's what I gave you for a peek into Monet's garden, is a little bit more color than sometimes I would give.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, you've mentioned a couple of times the pulled warp technique, and this is not a how-to show. This isn't a workshop or anything, but for a lot of people may not know what you mean by that. Can you give us a brief description of what a pulled warp is?
Sure.
And we have some images that will go along with that. Good.
Okay. If you start with tapestry as being a weft-faced weave, meaning that what you weave through the stable threads, that's the weft, that you really are seeing that and ordinarily not seeing the warp. The warp is more of an armature, a structure beneath it. So for pulled warp, it's the idea that you can weave certain areas and not weave other areas. And I've used in these, I'm pointing to my screen as though someone can see me, but if you see, for instance, on the far left, you'll see what I've used pieces of tagboard to keep that space open. But you'll also see in the middle one where I've pulled the tagboard out that it holds its shape for the most part. And then the picture on the right, you'll see that there are actually two kind of waves or two bumps more toward the top of the picture, and then you'll see this mess of warp ends beneath it. So I had already pulled 2 out of the 3 little picket areas, and I am yet in that last picture to pull the last one. So it's just a matter of keeping threads open until you're done, and then you pull them closed, and it will sometimes create a 3D texture to it. And in this one, I've created a long picket. And when I pulled that out and closed it, you can see that there's a bit of a flare on the right of the screen in the right-hand image. Does that help?
No, that's great. I think that helps people understand completely. So what was it about this technique? Because you've used it often. What was it about this technique that kind of grabbed you that you went with this?
Okay, I'm gonna expose myself here.
Uh-oh.
I am largely self-taught weaver. I've had some workshops, never went to university for it, never went, through a lot of schooling for weaving. So I've mostly groped around in the dark to figure out what I'm doing. In 2016, I went to one of the workshops that American Tapestry Alliance offered, which was taught by Susan Iverson. And the workshop was on pulled warp. And I suddenly had a new tool in the toolbox, and I came home and I couldn't get enough of it because it was just another area to explore. So I have continued to use it, used it pretty deeply for a few years. And then, I see another shiny object somewhere off in the distance and I have to go follow that shiny object. But I have used it because it just offers dimensionality. It makes, I think, a viewer sort of look at it a little bit more carefully, trying to figure out what's going on, how that happened, but also to, I guess, weaving sometimes isn't understood for its challenges and its advantages. You might see a painting and you might see a weaving that's in some way similar, but the process of painting and the process of weaving is so different. So I think anytime you can get somebody to really study a weaving, they can start to understand what we all as weavers appreciate and enjoy.
Oh, I like that. I like that 3-dimensional, you're right. It makes your eye get busy and start looking. That's wonderful. I love that.
Yeah, good.
Now, you have also designed and created a line of clothing, and it seems like a big leap from clothing to tapestry. Can you tell us about how that change came about?
Yeah, through a couple decades, 2 or 3. I came out of college like I'd been shot out of a cannon. I really wanted to weave, and okay, I'm going to give my my age range away. I got out of school in 1979, and there was a lot going on in shows and in the world of art and craft. So I started out doing a little bit of fabric, a little bit of tapestry, and realized I needed to focus and concentrate. And it turned out that I was making one-of-a-kind fabric. So in any of my selvage to selvage fabric, I never repeated. I didn't have any repeats. I would just put on a little bit of music and I would feel my way through winding off a warp. And it was never a repeat. There should have been a degree of balance, but not symmetry in it. So for instance, in the white pants with the red inset, that selvage to selvage, I had numerous different whites along one border, but not quite at the border was that red section. And then the occasional red stripe that went through the white, so that it was with the understanding when I constructed that pair of pants, that that's exactly where that red bar would fit. So I was playing with fabric, having a great time with it. What I didn't love eventually was that clothing needs to fit a body. And when I was making one-of-a-kind clothing, if I had made it in a size 10 and I suddenly had a size 4 person who wanted it, or the reverse, I had this one-of-a-kind piece and they'd say, I want the exact same thing, but I want it in my size. So the profile of the clothing remained the same, but the fabric was always going to be different. And that created some challenges, and it finally just made me want to tear my hair out. So I had been doing the weaving. Was weaving to capacity, and I couldn't. It was hard for me to hire people, and I couldn't necessarily keep up with everything I wanted to do, and I burned out. So I left it for a while. I raised my kids, and then when I had some more space and time, I brought my loom back into the house. And in 2011, I wanted to come back to weaving, but I didn't want to have the aspects of weaving that I had not enjoyed. So that's when I started playing more with the surface design with tapestry. That was a long answer.
No,
Sorry
that makes good sense. It's almost like you came full circle. And
I wanted to love it again. And I sort of made that promise to myself, I'd only come back if I could love it again.
Well, good for you. And good for us that you did love it again and you came back.
Thank you.
We're glad.
I also wanted to be a rule breaker. I mean,
Oh,
I've learned since that everybody's a rule breaker out there. But when I started weaving, it felt very rulesy to me. And I didn't like the rules. So when I came back to tapestry, I started cutting up commercial fabric and sort of insetting it along with, a full pass selvage to selvage, but then I'd inset little pieces of fabric in. So that was my first what I thought was a breakout moment. I've since learned that I was not so terribly unique in it, but it helped.
yeah. Well, some of your work, such as Hands Across the Borders and All the Beautiful Souls Lost, have either a political or a social theme to them. And you mentioned that earlier, that was your way of saying your piece. But would you talk some more about the themes that you choose and how you incorporate those into your work?
Sure. I have a great love, which is public radio. And where I think a lot of people listen to music, I find that, like many artists, I can be isolated in my workday, but I don't want to be isolated from the world so much. I need to keep my finger on the pulse and know if the sky is going to fall in. So I will listen to public radio, and they have such rich, wonderful stories, and not just the headlines, but really digging into it. So some of my themes may come from the news of the day. Some of it, so for instance, Hands Across the Border is a piece where I combined the colors of the American and the Mexican flag. So you've got the red, white, and blue, and you've got the red, white, and green. And I've got my little green and blue and red triangle in the center of the piece with a line going through. And it was at a time when it just felt as though, and I recognize I may step on toes, and I don't mean anything by it, but it just felt like we in America have a lot of opportunity, and maybe we could extend ourselves with a little greater kindness. So it was that kind of feeling as I was weaving that piece. When it comes to other kinds of pieces, for instance, we saw the climate change piece earlier. There's a lot of discussion about climate change and things that can and can't be done. And so I, for instance, the piece that's behind me right here is called Vanishing. So it kind of sort of depends. I bounce around with my themes, but I've had some themes for COVID. For instance, the one on the right here is To All the Beautiful Souls Lost, was a COVID piece. And it was, as we were all just shell-shocked and numb and sad, it was something that I needed to say. So there's another piece. I can't figure out what my hand is. This piece, which is also a COVID piece, which is Shelter in Place. So those were pieces that struck me. And then I have done some. I did a couple for the Me Too movement, couple immigration, some Black Lives Matter pieces. It kind of sort of depends on when I wake up and I've got a new piece to do. There's something that's just fighting to get out. Then I try and figure out what I want to say and in what format I want to say it.
Would you say that a majority of your work has a theme, or do you ever find you just want to do color and images and whatever?
In the same way that I didn't like the grand scale of rules, there are certain kinds of rules I don't impose on myself either. Like I was talking about shiny objects. It might be, as we all know, again, as weavers, weaving takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time you have gone through birthing a piece and completing it, there are a lot of other ideas that can come into your thoughts, and you may discover something while you're weaving, or it may be something that you have thought of in another way, and you need to free up the loom so that you can get something else going. So sometimes there's follow through, and sometimes it's wildly different themes.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was looking at your website and just seeing you here and there, I was struck by how you are a member of at least one guild and a couple of art organizations. So how do you think being part of a guild or an art organization impacts on you as a person and you as an artist?
Such a good question, Kathy. And actually, little did you know that in sequence it makes sense. I had been in the art world for a relatively brief period of time, maybe about 6, 7, 8 years originally, and left it for a long time. And coming back to it, the art world had changed, and whether we call it art or craft, there was a lot of change, and social media had come in and technology had changed. So there are a lot of things that happened in there. I was describing to you earlier that I'm in my home studio, but I have a little satellite studio in a building that's got studio space for about 30 artists, and community with a capital C. It's wonderful community because you can feed off each other. You can understand the challenges that one another is going through. Same kind of thing with some of the other organizations like Handweavers Guild of America. There's so much that you all offer in terms of resources, in terms of community. American Tapestry Alliance, I've been on the board there for about a year. And we also, we're a little bit more collected in terms of tapestry specific rather than weaving in general. And then Tapestry Weavers West is an organization I belong to that's at least was started more locally along the West Coast. But with any of these organizations, there's an enormous amount of generosity and sharing, and anywhere from sharing of techniques to sharing of concepts to sharing of challenges. All of those things I think are fantastic. And those of us involved in the arts realize what a wealth it is in terms of spirit and in terms of inspiration. And sometimes it's the first thing to be cut. So, in terms of funding. So for me, being a part of those organizations is invaluable.
I agree. I miss my guild, and I'll be glad when we are all together again.
Have you been Zooming at all or been together?
Oh, yes, we've been Zooming. But I look forward to, we all get to see each other again.
I get it.
I have another statement from you. It says, working on the loom provides me the opportunity to sit in stillness of my thoughts and allowing my hands to think. I love that. Can you talk some about that?
Yeah. Have you ever been at a time when someone looks at you and says, "Penny for your thoughts," and you have no clue what you've been thinking? So for me, weaving is, and people have said this, I think, a lot, it can be very meditative. So when you get the rhythm going, if you sort of shut out the noise of life or your day or whatever, suddenly you're just trusting instinct, for me, trusting my hands to make the decisions as I go along. So going back one more time to oh gosh, I can't even remember what my own piece is called, but the climate change piece, the triptych, and seeing, and also actually Hands Across the Border, you'll see that there's a movement of sort of the tans and the whites in Hands Across the Border, or the blues and the sea in the other one. And I don't use hachure. I don't really do a very practiced kind of color change to start blending or shading. I just have a way of doing a rhythm, just sort of feeling where a color wants to be. And that's, again, me not wanting to be, buckled in. So that's letting my hands think.
love that. All right. Now, these are some panel pieces that we're going to pull up now that are dichotomies. And these are signatures that you mentioned earlier, doing the dichotomies. Now, this is a kind of a signature for you. And this piece is called Seeing Both Sides. And it's an example of that dichotomy. But how did you come up with that design of the three and putting them together? And is this also pulled warp?
This is also pulled warp. And I mean, you can see probably better than any where you see the white sections and the sort of purpley blue sections. And there's, well, less of a sharp line in these because I was using something called eccentric weft in the white and black sections where it's, you know, anyway, I'm not going to get into technical stuff too much, but I was interested in having an uneven border. And it made perfect sense to use one of my pieces of tag board between these color sections and white black sections to not go full selvage to selvage on the blue sections and then to really highlight the difference between them. And it's almost a conversation, or it's an argument, whatever you want to call it. But it was just a great exercise in exploring two different thought patterns and do it visually. And again, I ask you because I'm sitting here yakking away, but does all that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good.
Well, talking more about dichotomy, we've got a next image, which is called Salmon Run. Now, what I love about this one is your use of opposites, because you've got the black and the white, and then you have that lovely color in the middle. But then you also have these sharp edges of the white inside the black pieces, and then the flow of those colors. I just love the opposites that you do here. Can you talk some about your use of opposites, or am I seeing something that's not there?
No, and I love how you're, you know, responding to that, because it's absolutely what I was trying to do was in those sort of tan, gray, black, white, whatever you want to call them areas. I really was sort of expressing a kind of energy, a kind of electrical sort of an energy there. And you get that by the movement, you know, these sort of zigzaggy movements, but then also the bleeding off of a little bit of the gray into the tan and the tan into the gray and all of that. And it was, you know, just something that I guess I was playing with at the time and discovered as I went along. But then there's sort of that calm of the eccentric weave of the colors blending into each other. I used that black line in there that goes between sort of the mustard colors and the olives and the sort of salmony pinky colors I use that's twining, and I've used that to hold that flow in place, to keep it where I want it and to build on that. So again, it's a way of saying there's a lot going in there that as you look at it, you know, you'll see more, but the overall effect, you don't have to know anything about weaving to know whether you respond to it or not. But yes, I think I was working with different kinds of energy in that.
Well, I know everybody who's watching and those who will watch in the future are going to be so excited to see your work in Knoxville, because I think they're going to look at it differently than if they had just walked into the gallery. Not to say they wouldn't love it just seeing it, but hearing you talk about the work and what goes into it, I think it will really change how people will look at it when they come in Knoxville.
Well, thank you. I mean, great. Thank you. And I would certainly say that, you know, I'm here in Northern California. If COVID ever lifts and we feel comfortable being in one another's presence, I would love to, you know, see people, show them the studio and what's happening out there. And if anybody has questions about the work, certainly, you know, it's fun to discuss it and find out what they're doing too.
Well, one thing we always want to know I do, is what inspires you? What are your inspirations? Are they images, nature? What inspires you?
Well, lots of things do. My kids do. My family does. Nature certainly does. And as I say, you know, sometimes issues do.
Mhm.
So one of the pieces that I did, I don't, you know, if anyone's interested, they can find it later on my site. But there was a piece during the Women's March, the first Women's March, and it was such an interesting time and kind of an uplifting time. At the same time, it was a really wild time for a lot of us. And I did a little piece called Women March, and I incorporated some little crocheted hats. So it was a little bit more of a folk art piece. So I did the weaving. There was a little bit of pulled warp in there with little flares and whatever in there. But then I started playing with doing little crocheted hats, which I've then put on the surface of the piece. And out of each little hat came a different hairstyle in different colors. So it showed, you know, gray haired gals and brown haired gals and blonde haired gals and all these, you know, and some with braids and some with little pigtails or whatever. I don't even remember what you asked me, but what inspires me, I guess, I think that there are just sometimes ideas that fly into my brain and I need to do it. But, you know, I'm also, there's another piece on my studio wall here called in my mother's garden. And yes, so that in terms of nature, that one did inspire me, or a peek into Monet's garden. So that in the beginning of the pandemic, I remember I walk for usually about an hour each morning. And I would go out into the neighborhood fully masked and feeling a little alien. And all the smells of spring were coming in behind the mask. And it was hard not to respond to that, just to think that the world was still alive, nature was still doing its thing, and we were going to have to figure it out to the best of our ability. But something like that inspired pieces as well.
Oh, that sounds great. That sounds great. Well, you know, let's take some questions from our audience. And we've got Patty sorry, Patty. What are the most unusual and interesting materials you've used in your weavings? And do you experiment, and what drives your curiosity? That's a great question.
That is a great question. I have actually, using pulled warp, I did these little channels in one of my pieces. And when the piece was done and pulled, I ended up inserting pieces of willow branch in there. So, you know, it wasn't during the weaving that I did that. I have used, there was a whole series of pieces I did called Family Album, in which I asked family members to give me a cast off article of clothing, something they were no longer using. And before they let me have it, I wanted them photographed. So my niece photographed everybody wearing their garment. And then they gave me their pieces and I cut them into shreds. And I ended up weaving them into separate panels so that each panel was of one person, and I put the photograph of the person against the panel and you could see. So for instance, my brother lives in Baton Rouge, and he gave me a shirt that was the Mardi Gras colors. So I ended up doing this really distinctly Mardi Gras colored piece, and then you have the picture of him wearing it. One of the more unique things I did was a piece called Triptychs. And I'd taken a trip with my two daughters overseas, and a lot of times in hotels, they'll give you the free magazine of, you know, the places to go, the places to eat, but mostly it's a big ad. And it was really cheap paper. And so what I did when I got home was to cut that inexpensive, that cheap, by cheap, I don't mean anything wrong, just that it was really thin paper. I cut it into strips and I wove it into 3 panels and called it Triptychs, because it was from our trip and it was a triptych, and it was the paper, and the paper, as I'd use my beater, because I do use a floor loom, the beater helped the paper to shred just a little bit. So it's got this really fun texture to it. That was a good question. Thanks.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Speaking of looms, a couple of people, Carol Goldsmith and somebody else, I'll find it in a minute. Oh, Catherine Esslinger. They want to know what kind of looms you do. So you use a floor loom for your tapestries, right?
I use floor loom for my tapestries. And when I took that class, when I was a sophomore in college, I had asked my teacher if she knew how to find a loom for me. And she said she had a friend who was selling her entire studio. And it just so happened that it was in a 46-inch Gilmore. And I didn't know what that was, but she said it was a good loom. So that's the one I started on, and I still have that. It's my baby. And since then, a few years ago, I drove myself to Stockton, California with my loom hanging half out of the car to bring it to Gilmore so that they could refurbish it for me, which they did. And while I was there, he had just finished tuning up a loom that had been returned after someone's grandmother had passed, and he hadn't posted it yet. So that was my second Gilmore. And then just a few weekends ago, I had my third Gilmore. So I've got 3 with different weaving widths, and I love them. That's what I use. I also have a nice large Murex, and I've done a couple pieces on it, and I love it. But I think that I learned on a floor loom, and that's probably what I prefer for the style of weaving I do. But I've also enjoyed using the Murex.
There you go. Everybody always wants to know what we use for our looms, right?
Yes.
And then the second question that goes along with that, of course, is what kind of yarn do you use for your warp and for your weft?
Right. And now I am going to preface all of this by saying, as I said, I'm self-taught largely. And if anyone hears what I say and says, oh, you're completely messed up, you really ought to be doing such and such, just private message me and let me know. But I am using a cotton centwine for my warp. Especially I learned to use that when I was doing the pulled warp because it has just a little bit more friction. I don't use wool for my weft for whatever reason. I don't. Occasionally I'll use linen, but the cotton centwine is really strong, and I used a fairly high tension. And when I was doing my fabric, I had too many years of having my warp ends pop on me. So the cotton centwine isn't going anywhere. It's really sturdy, really strong, has enough friction so that when I use the pulled warp technique, I don't have things moving on me too much. Oh, and weft. I have been using the Collinwood rug wool for my weft and combining that with something really fine, like an 8-2 or a 10-2, either a cotton or a tencel or something like that, because I like just that little bit of an extra bit of color in there, a little bit of depth that I get by combining some. And then again, in vanishing behind me, oh my gosh, I used just the most textured stuff I could find. And when it wasn't textured enough, I created texture. So that one's got a lot of surface lumps.
So when you say thick and thin, do you spin them together, or you weave a shot of thick and then you weave a shot of thin?
Good question. I that was the other thing. I didn't have a clue what my bobbin winder was for or how to do it. So I tried the first time I ever used the bobbin winder, which came with my original loom. I started winding yarn on it and realized that it wasn't going to come off if I didn't have like a bobbin or a something. So I learned really quickly not to do that, but I just use scrap paper. So I will take scrap paper and make myself a nice little paper bobbin. And then whatever colors I'm using, I will put into the same shed and just wind them together on my bobbin. And then, of course, I'll mesh things of, like, I don't know, I've got, I'm doing a fairly atonal piece right now, but these are, maybe 3 different variations on a theme, and they'll all get melded in.
Well, do you dye your own yarn? Karen LeBlanc wanted to know that.
No, the only time I did that, I lived in Maine for a year, and I lived down the road from a Shaker village, and they were offering all kinds of wonderful courses. And I was like a kid in a candy store, and I realized that I would never get anything done if I followed every little tributary. So if I dyed, if I spun, if I did all those things, I would be in heaven, but I wouldn't necessarily be able to create what's going on in my head as quickly as I might have wanted to. So yes, one of these days I may, but at present I don't.
Okay. Michaela McIntosh wanted to know, with the pink and the green and then the black and white, she said, is that hung differently than it's woven?
Yes.
Okay.
So I would, the sort of the black, white, gray, tan, whatever you want to call it, that was woven first. then tagboard put in, advanced to the next section, which had the pinks and greens, etc. And then when it came off the loom, a piece that was woven vertically, then suddenly is hung, yeah, horizontally. That's, good eye, yeah, because we do try and make sense of these things.
Michaela's pretty smart.
Yes,
Michaela's
clearly.
Sure. Dennett Weiss wants to know, this is a good question too. How do you keep project notes? What is your process? Oh.
Okay, so I thought something like this could happen. I'm going to make a mess and I'm going to probably drop everything in my water here. Sometimes I sketch something out. Sometimes I just wing it. So I don't know if you can see this. Okay, so that's this piece here.
Oh, okay, great.
And that's, so a lot of people, tapestry artists, are so much smarter than I am, and they do cartoons. And I use my graph paper, and I do a little, a key to how many inches equal how many inches. So that's that. But then there was a time when I was being much better about these things. And let's see if I can find, well, okay, so here are, a bunch of different little pieces that I was doing, but there was a time in there when I was being so responsible. And this was a piece where I actually took clippings of the yarn that I had used and put them there. And I thought, what a great system. And I didn't keep up with it. So, sometimes I'm on it. Sometimes I'm just on to the next project.
Well, those of us who are bad about that are saying, thank you. Thank you. It's not just us. All right.
No.
If somebody, Catherine Blackett said she's loved the use of the twining in the salmon run. Do you also use sumac in your tapestry weavings?
Frequently.
Okay.
Frequently. And even, for instance, in a solid section, just to give it that little extra bit of something. So again, if you go back to the climate change triptych, if you were to zoom in on different sections of it where it's just, it looks like it's might be all the same, you'll see different sections of sumac in there but it's not like a full line of it. It might just be in a certain area where I've done it just to, I think, build up a little bit of texture. That's sort of the musical part of things too. I just want to feel, the rise and fall color change.
Well, somebody wants to know, what are the sizes of your pieces?
Good question. Vanishing behind me is among the larger ones, and it's 3 feet by 4 feet. But then the pieces next to it, like Gee's Bend, Nod to Gee's Bend, that one framed is about 14, 15 square. And then there's one above it that's glacial pools. I don't know if you can see that one. So sometimes I'll do smaller pieces that might be 10, 12 inches, but then frequently I'll do pieces that are about 2 feet wide by 40 inches, something like that. And again, on the website, it'll give dimensions for all of those things, but it can be hard to understand because you want to see it in context of a person or something else.
Well, people are asking, how long does it take to weave one of your tapestries? And I know that varies, but do you have an idea of what your time frames will be if you're doing a piece? And to go along with that, do you have several works going on at once?
Second part of the question first. I have my satellite studio, and I just finished a piece on it that was on it for a year because during COVID I didn't go in there. So yes, there's frequently a piece on my home loom and on my my satellite studio loom, and it sort of depends on what kind of mood I'm in or whether I have a sense of urgency to finish a piece. Or it might be that I've got stuff that I've got to get done at home and there, so whatever it is. Now that I've got my third loom, I expect there will be even more going on. So that was the second part of the question. And the first part of the question was how long? Clueless, absolutely clueless. It depends on a lot of things. Sometimes there's a lot more movement and activity in a piece than one might think. So there's a piece I'm doing right now where I have sections that are selvage to selvage weaving, and then sections that are the eccentric weave where I'm building and using the twining and all of that. So I might fly through one section of it, and the next section is going to take me a week or longer, but I tend to be impatient. So I don't usually work on a piece for many months at a time. I might work on pieces for weeks to maybe a couple of months at a time, but usually not a whole lot longer than that.
Well, I love your philosophical approach to weaving. And while you were talking, I thought about this next question, which is from Suzanne Chappell, which is, do you teach workshops?
How sweet is that? Oh my God, there are so many tapestry weavers who are so much more experienced than I am. The long answer is, when my children were in kindergarten, I wanted to do something, you always want to be there where your kids are. Yeah. And I mentioned to the kindergarten teacher that I was a weaver. And I even have another prop here. So can you see this baby? So I built, and she said, oh my God, it's the greatest pre-math skill, because it's the under over, it's that kind of a thing. So I built a bunch of looms for them, and I did, if anyone's interested and has young kids, I did their school colors were blue and yellow. I did blue, yellow, blue, yellow, blue, yellow, alternating the warp. And I'd give them these paint stir sticks. And I'd say, okay, put this stick underneath every blue thread. And then, you prop it up. So we did that. And I had the kids bring in 12-inch wide pieces of anything, from holiday gift wrap to, plastic wrap out of the drawer to ribbons, to whatever there was, so that they didn't have to worry too much, and they just were able to put that through. Doing that on a basic frame loom, no problem, simple, and could do that. And even my popsicle stick looms. But I haven't taught originally because I thought a lot of people really they'd see the loom and they'd really want to work on the loom, and I didn't have extras. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of an excuse. I could, but there are, and I'm sure some of them are listening, there are some outstanding tapestry weavers, teachers who do online. They've got it all figured out. It's conceivable I could do a little teaching, but there are people who are so much better than I.
You're so modest.
It's thank you for making it sound okay, but it was a really long way of saying, yes, I could, but I don't think I'm your best bet.
Oh, thank you. Helen Shearer, have you ever reproduced any prehistoric textiles?
Reproduced any? What an interesting question. I know there are probably pieces that have been inspired, but I have never reproduced any. And it's maybe just the flavor of something that hit in my brain, but I don't know that I have. If she has something more to that question, she's got me thinking. See, that could inspire something, to come next.
Now this one, I'm not sure. This is from Mimi Rhodes, and I'm not sure what she's asking. What techniques are used in there's a word, I don't know what it is, in place? Are the lines in the white center panels woven flat or on top of sumac, or what? Do we have a piece that says something in place? Like, is it the one behind you? What's the one behind you?
Oh, the one behind me?
On your other side.
Vanishing?
The one on the other side.
Shelter in place. Shelter in place.
I bet that's what she was trying to say. Shelter.
Okay, and so try the question again.
What technique was used?
Oh, there are a variety.
She says, are the lines in the white center panels woven flat? Are they on top in sumac, or what?
I see. Okay, so there are sort of white center sections, and there's some red running through it. You might be too far away from it to be able to see the red. The red is twining going over eccentric weave, sort of helping to hold the flow in there. But then the stripiness on the outside is just swapping out my black and my white. And it's I haven't done anything after taking it off the loom. It was all woven in at the time of of weaving that piece.
Well, Virginia Glenn said the white black sections in your pieces with 5 parts reminds me of birch tree bark. And it does. I thought that too. I agree, Virginia. It does.
I like that.
Bark.
I
Yeah.
like that.
You mentioned earlier that you invited people to come see you in Northern California, and Patricia McDowell she's signing up. She said, where is
Good.
your studio in Northern California, and can one visit?
Well, the short answer is yes, and the more complicated answer is that the studio building is still observing COVID stuff. So if she's interested, absolutely get in touch with me, either through my website, or I don't know whether through my website is probably as easy as anything. And I can bring guests into the studio building as long as we're masked or vaccinated or whatever it is. But yeah, absolutely. During good times, the building, it's called Artworks Downtown, which is in San Rafael, California. And during good times, we have a second Friday of the month art walk. And every second Friday of the month, we used to have the building open and all the artists were in their studios and people could flow through the building without having any special prior arrangement. But given COVID, the building, the artists could work there, but they really have not encouraged folks to come through. We're getting a little bit looser in Northern California now because we're doing reasonably well. So yes, I would love to have visitors, but you need to contact me first.
There you go. Davis Perkins wants to know, love your work. With increased political awareness of the climate change peril, do you foresee this affecting any future new work?
Always, always. Yes, it will. And Davis, you should check out, is one of the artists in Artworks Downtown, and he is a brilliant painter. So you can check out his work too. But yeah, I certainly will be doing more climate change pieces, and it just depends on when the muse catches me.
Well, I feel inspired just listening to you. This has been so much fun today. Thank you so much for being on Textiles and Tea.
Oh, Kathy, you've been wonderful to talk with, and I really appreciate it. No, this is great.
Well, I love your work, and I appreciate you how much you shared about how you go about doing your work. And I want to encourage people to, if you want to know more about Sue and her work, go to her website, which is www.sueweil.com. And there's some interesting things on there for you to check out, and you'll see a lot more about Sue. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, please.
I want to say thank you also to Meridian Millhouse for their sponsoring today's Textiles and Tea. They go to their website because they have these beautiful tops for spinners. When you land, you see those right there. And then this beautiful merino mulberry silk. Go check it out. And a lot more that they offer at meridianmillhouse.com. If you would like to sponsor Textiles and Tea, or your company or your guild, please go to our website at weavespindye.org and see more and get all the information that you need to be a sponsor. Textiles and Tea is supported by the generous donations to the Fiber Trust. If you would like to see more programming like this, please support HGA by becoming a member or donating, or both, at our website at weavespindye.org. Now, if you didn't get to see everything today, or you want to watch it again, or you have a friend that you want to watch with, Textiles and Tea is recorded. All of them have been. Today's were recorded, all the past ones, and you can watch those on the HGA Facebook page. You don't have to have a Facebook account. You can just go on and watch the episode that you would like to see. Next week, we are going to have tea with Nazina Mears. She does this gorgeous, rich, and interesting textile fiber arts. You'll love her. So I hope you'll come join us. Thank you all so much for being here today. I appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Have a great week, and I'll see you next Tuesday. Happy tea.